Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, June 9th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will be quite pleasant with a high of 81.9 degrees Fahrenheit. As the day turns to night, expect a low of 60.7 degrees Fahrenheit. It sounds like a perfect day to be out and about. Looking ahead on today's program, we will delve into the legal disputes that are beginning to surface following recent unrest in Los Angeles. We will examine the parties involved and what the potential implications could be. Additionally, we will shift our focus to the American West, where there is a significant reevaluation of how the region plans to secure its water future amidst changing environmental conditions. All these stories and more are coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with escalating tensions in Los Angeles, where protests have dramatically ramped up following U.S. President Donald Trump's controversial deployment of hundreds of National Guard troops to the city. This move has ignited a significant legal and constitutional dispute between the federal government and California state authorities. For more on this developing story, we turn to our reporter, Ethan. Ethan, what can you tell us about the current situation in Los Angeles?
Grace, what began as protests against federal immigration crackdowns is now, as of today, June 9, 2025, in its fourth day of unrest. The situation intensified significantly over the weekend, particularly on Sunday, June 8, when President Trump authorized the deployment of National Guard members. This has created a direct confrontation with California state authorities, as reporting from CBC News indicates.
So these protests stem from federal immigration crackdowns. Can you elaborate on what exactly sparked these demonstrations and who was targeted?
Absolutely, Grace. The demonstrations began last Friday, June 6th, in downtown Los Angeles, after federal immigration agents conducted sweeps across Southern California. These operations, primarily by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Homeland Security investigations, led to over 100 arrests in the Los Angeles area by June 8th. According to DHS.gov, the operations focused on what they called, quote, criminal illegal aliens, end quote. However, federal officials acknowledged not all individuals arrested had criminal records. Some were taken into custody for administrative immigration violations like overstaying a visa, as CBS News pointed out.
And how have protesters reacted to these raids and the subsequent National Guard deployment? What have we seen on the streets?
The streets of Los Angeles have seen widespread unrest, Grace. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets, leading to clashes with law enforcement. On Sunday, the situation really escalated. Protesters blocked the southbound 101 freeway, making for no easy road for commuters. In a striking act, at least 4 self-driving Waymo cars were set on fire, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Demonstrators hurled objects like concrete and rocks at California Highway Patrol officers. Outside the Metropolitan Detention Center, hundreds gathered, chanting, quote, shame, end quote, at National Guard members.
Those sound like incredibly volatile scenes. How has law enforcement responded, and what have the arrest and injury reports been like?
Law enforcement has responded with forceful tactics, Grace. Reporting from CBC News details the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray to disperse crowds. Several dozen people were arrested over the weekend. Notable arrests included one individual for throwing a Molotov cocktail at police and another for ramming a motorcycle into officers. There have been injuries, too, with at least 3 law enforcement officers hurt. Additionally, a camera operator from the British Broadcasting Corporation and a reporter for Australia's 9 network were hit by rubber bullets, as reported by CBC News.
Shifting gears now to the federal response, President Trump's deployment of the National Guard has certainly been a major point of contention. Can you explain his justification for this controversial move?
President Trump's decision to deploy the National Guard has indeed been a lightning rod, Grace. He authorized a total of 2,000 National Guard members, with approximately 300 federal troops already arriving in Los Angeles. The U.S. Northern Command stated their purpose is to protect federal property and personnel. Trump justified this action by invoking a legal provision allowing deployment in cases of, quote, rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, end quote, as CBC News has reported. He stated on Truth Social that, quote, radical left protests by instigators and often paid troublemakers will not be tolerated, end quote.
That sounds like a clear escalation from the White House. How have California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass reacted to this federal intervention, particularly since they say they didn't ask for federal assistance?
Their reaction has been one of strong objection, Grace. Both Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass urged against the deployment, stating that local authorities had the situation under control and neither asked for nor needed federal assistance. Governor Newsom labeled the move, quote, purposefully inflammatory, end quote, and a, quote, serious breach of state sovereignty, end quote, accusing Trump of manufacturing a crisis for political purposes. Newsom has announced his plan to sue the Trump administration, calling the deployment, quote, illegal, immoral, and unconstitutional, end quote. He stated, quote, we're going to test that theory with a lawsuit today, end quote, referencing today, June 9th, for the filing.
That's a huge development, the planned lawsuit today. Ethan, from a legal standpoint, how unusual is it for a president to deploy the National Guard against a state governor's will?
Grace, this is truly a rare and contentious move. According to CBC News, it marks the first time since 1965, during a civil rights march in Alabama, that a president has federalized the National Guard against a state's governor's will. The Trump administration reportedly invoked U.S. Code Title 10, Section 12,406, which allows the president to call the National Guard into federal service when there is a, quote, rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, end quote. Legal scholars like Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of the UC Berkeley School of Law, have called this, quote, truly chilling, end quote.
So this is legally uncharted territory in modern times. What has the political reaction been nationally to this unfolding situation?
The situation has certainly drawn sharp political reactions across the nation, Grace. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders criticized Trump's order as a move towards, quote, authoritarianism, end quote. Former Vice President Kamala Harris condemned the arrests and deployment as a, quote, cruel, calculated agenda to spread panic and division, end quote. Conversely, House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Trump ally, supported the move, claiming Governor Newsom showed an, quote, inability or an unwillingness to do what is necessary, end quote.
Ethan, looking at this through a historical lens, how do these current protests compare to past periods of unrest in Los Angeles, like the 1992 riots or the 2020 George Floyd protests?
That's an excellent question, Grace, and the comparison is not lost on observers. The 1992 Los Angeles riots and the 2020 George Floyd protests were far more extensive in scale, involving thousands of arrests and billions in property damage. Quantitatively, the current June 2025 protests, with dozens of arrests and notable property damage, like the burning of several Waymo cars, have not yet reached that scale. The key distinction in this 2025 scenario, as WeForum.org emphasizes, remains the unprecedented political clash over the National Guard deployment against the will of state leadership.
It's clear the situation is still very volatile and represents a significant moment in the ongoing debate over federal power and immigration policy. Thank you for that comprehensive report, Ethan.
My pleasure, Grace.
That was story 1 of 2 this morning. Welcome back. For our second story this morning, we are turning our attention to the American West, a region grappling with a water crisis that is reaching a critical crossroads. Joining us to shed some light on this complex issue is our intrepid reporter, Chloe. Chloe, it seems cities out west are facing a parched future, yet they are finding innovative ways to quench their thirst. What is the latest on this evolving situation?
Grace, that is absolutely right. We are seeing a pivotal shift, a real sea change, in how communities in the arid West are approaching their water supplies. The core issue, according to reporting from NPR, is rapid population growth coupled with the deepening impacts of climate change. It is a dual approach: embrace technological innovation like advanced wastewater recycling, but also confront the contentious debate about managing or even limiting population growth itself. It is truly a balancing act, a watertight situation, if you will.
A watertight situation indeed. Let us dive into that. St. George, Utah, seems to be leading the charge with a rather ambitious plan. Tell us about their billion-dollar bet on recycled sewage.
St. George is a prime example of this water conundrum. Their population has doubled since 2002 to over 200,000 and is projected to double again by 2050. This puts immense strain on their limited resources from the Virgin River, which are already challenged by more intense heat and less reliable rainfall due to climate change, as NPR, KBRW Public Radio, and Georgia Public Broadcasting have all noted. To combat this, the Washington County Water Conservancy District, or WCWCD, is investing over $1 billion in a new wastewater reclamation plant. This facility, according to NPR, will clean effluent using screens, bacteria, and UV light. It is expected to open by the end of 2025, which is about 205 days from today, initially for outdoor irrigation. But the long-term vision, within 2 decades, is to integrate this highly purified water directly into the drinking supply, aiming to provide over half of their additional water needs by the 2040s.
That is an incredible investment. Are they also focusing on conservation, or is it all about creating new supply?
They are definitely doing both, Grace. Conservation is a key part of their strategy, as NPR reports. St. George is limiting grass in new developments, and they are offering residents up to $2 per square foot to remove irrigated lawns. Since late 2022, this program has incentivized the removal of over 2 million square feet of grass. The WCWCD's Regional Reuse Purification System is a multifaceted initiative designed to produce 24,000 acre-feet of water annually by 2042, enough for over 40,000 homes. This involves, quote, indirect potable reuse, which means blending purified wastewater with existing reservoir water before retreatment and distribution. This ambitious project, costing over $1 billion, has already secured over $20 million in federal funding and led to water rate increases to encourage conservation, according to information from WCWCD.gov and sgcityutah.gov. This all comes after the shelving of the Lake Powell pipeline, making local, drought-proof sources absolutely vital, as reported by Kunk.org and GreatSaltLakeNews.org.
So St. George is really putting its money where its water is. Is this high-tech approach unique to Utah, or are other Western cities also turning to wastewater purification?
Not at all, Grace. St. George is really a microcosm of what is happening across the western U.S., especially in the Colorado River Basin, which faces severe strain, as NPR has highlighted. UCLA water researcher Noah Garrison points out that while major cities like Los Angeles, Phoenix, and San Francisco already recycle significant amounts of sewage, Utah currently reuses less than 1% of its wastewater. Garrison suggests that if all basin states reused more than half of their wastewater, which Nevada and Arizona already do, it could offset approximately 1/3 of the region's projected water shortfall. Stanford water researcher Nusha Ajami adds that the main barrier to scaling up wastewater reuse is not the technology, but rather policy and governance. The mindset around sewage has truly shifted from disposal to recognition as a vital, finite resource.
That is fascinating. So sewage is no longer just waste, but a resource. Are there any other notable examples of cities embracing this advanced wastewater purification?
Absolutely. Las Vegas has been a long-standing model, nearly doubling its population while decreasing total water consumption through large-scale wastewater reuse, treating over 100 million gallons daily. Beyond Nevada, Phoenix is upgrading its Cave Creek water reclamation plant, aiming to produce nearly 7 million gallons of purified water daily by 2027, serving 25,000 households, according to Phoenix.gov. Scottsdale has practiced indirect potable reuse for over 3 decades, and Tucson is also constructing an AWP facility, slated for completion by late 2031, with information from scottsdaleyes.gov and arizona.edu. In California, the Metropolitan Water District is developing Pure Water Southern California, a multi-billion-dollar initiative projected to produce 150 million gallons daily by 2032, enough for 500,000 homes, as watereducation.org and laytimes.com report. Los Angeles is pursuing Operation Next to recycle 100% of available treated wastewater by 2035, with details from CWEA.org and Senate.gov. Even El Paso, Texas, is constructing its Pure Water Center, set to be operational by 2028, which will be the first in the U.S. to send 10 million gallons of purified water daily directly into the distribution system, according to Carollo.com and SmartWaterMagazine.com.
That sounds like a lot of innovation and significant investment. But is it really the only answer? What about the alternative strategy of managing population growth itself?
That is the other side of the coin, Grace, and it is a fiercely debated one. Some communities argue that infinite growth simply cannot be sustained with finite water resources, especially given the ongoing mega-drought in the Southwest, a point made by resilience.org and tnfonline.com. Proponents advocate for water-smart growth, integrating land use planning with water availability, and challenging the idea of endless technological fixes that come with significant economic and environmental costs, according to planning.org. They even point out that low water rates can create perverse incentives, noting St. George's per capita water use is nearly double that of Tucson, Arizona, a city with a strong conservation history, as highlighted by resilience.org.
So essentially, instead of finding more water, you manage the demand. Where are we seeing this approach in action?
Arizona offers some stark examples. In June 2023, Arizona restricted new housing developments in parts of the Phoenix metropolitan area that rely on groundwater, based on projections of a 4% groundwater shortfall over the next century, according to arizona.edu and kjzz.org. Developers must now verify a 100-year water supply for new projects. The unincorporated community of Rio Verde Foothills became a cautionary tale when its hauled water supply was cut off in January 2023, leaving hundreds of homes in crisis, as reported by MotherJones.com and Time.com. Utah has also seen towns like Oakley and Hennifer implement moratoriums on new home construction due to water scarcity, according to kpcw.org and townlift.com. And in California, the 2001 Show Me the Water laws, SB 610 and SB 221, require large new developments to prove a sufficient long-term water supply before approval, as noted by ppic.org. The coastal community of Bolinas in Marin County famously implemented a moratorium on new water meters in 1971 that remains in effect, effectively freezing its population, according to hcn.org and laytimes.com.
It seems the West is truly at a crossroads, balancing these two very different philosophies. What about the comparative costs and long-term effectiveness of these approaches?
It is a complex calculation, Grace. As of 2025, producing non-potable recycled water costs around $0.32 per cubic meter, but treating it to drinking water standards can be 4 times more expensive than traditional groundwater sources, though these costs can be offset by government subsidies, according to westernwaterca.gov. The long-term effectiveness is significant. It creates a drought-proof and reliable local water source, reducing dependence on climate-vulnerable external supplies. On the other hand, population growth restrictions carry a different kind of cost, primarily economic impacts like potential declines in GDP and increased housing costs. However, the long-term effectiveness of curbing population growth is undeniable. It directly reduces the number of water users and alleviates strain on existing supplies. Ultimately, Grace, experts suggest a sustainable water future for the American West will likely require a hybrid approach, combining technological innovation with a strategic conversation about the future of growth in an increasingly water-scarce environment.
Chloe, that was a truly insightful and comprehensive look at the West's water future. It sounds like they are working hard to ensure their populations do not run dry. Thank you for that excellent report.
My pleasure, Grace.
In Washington, a controversy is developing at the Smithsonian. President Trump announced on social media that he has terminated Kim Saget. She is the director of the National Portrait Gallery. He called her a highly partisan supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. However, this has created a major debate over presidential authority. The Smithsonian is not a typical government agency. It is a trust governed by a board of regents. Legal experts note that the power to hire and fire directors rests with the Secretary of the Smithsonian, not the President. The White House has compiled a list of grievances against Ms. Saget. However, she is reportedly still reporting to work. The Board of Regents is holding emergency meetings on the matter. Turning to the economy, the White House is promoting a surge in government revenue from tariffs. However, it appears the cost is being passed directly to Americans. Data shows a substantial rise in tariff collections. Economists confirm the costs are absorbed within the country. United States importers pay the duties. They typically pass those costs on to consumers through higher prices. Projections from groups like the Penn-Wharton budget model warn about the consequences. While tariffs could raise trillions in revenue over the next decade, it would come at a steep price. This includes a long-run reduction in gross domestic product and wages for the average household. It seems this trade policy is not beneficial for everyone's wallet. Overseas, activists, including prominent climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, have encountered trouble. Israeli forces intercepted their British-flagged yacht named the Madeleine. It was attempting to breach the naval blockade of Gaza with a symbolic amount of humanitarian aid. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition organized the voyage. They say their vessel was unlawfully boarded in international waters. Israel's foreign ministry dismissed the mission as a selfie yacht and a publicity stunt. They stated the dozen detained activists will be deported. The move was condemned by Turkey. Turkey called it a violation of international law. Meanwhile, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is aiming for a significant increase in its defenses. Secretary General Mark Rutte is set to call for a monumental 400% boost in the alliance's air and missile defense capabilities. Citing the aerial terror that Russia has delivered in Ukraine, Rutte will argue that hope is not a strategy. This push is part of a significant increase in collective defense. It also includes a proposed new spending target for members, climbing towards 5% of gross domestic product. The Kremlin has already reacted to the expected announcement. They are labeling the alliance an instrument of aggression, and back home, a debate is growing over immigration enforcement. The 287 grams program deputizes local police to enforce federal immigration law. It has expanded at an unprecedented rate under the Trump administration. It grew from 135 to nearly 650 agreements since last December. The White House calls it a force multiplier for deporting criminal aliens. However, government watchdogs and civil liberties groups are raising concerns. They cite a historic lack of oversight and a failure to ensure proper training. They also note the high potential for racial profiling. This erodes trust between police and the communities they serve. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.